camping trip, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think everybody that's been trying to get in is either here or in the process of joining. So I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Steve and let him introduce our guest for this evening.
And please allow me to share, Rick.
Oh, I haven't done that. I apologize for that.
Well, I'm really thrilled to introduce Humberto, who I met in the early 70s, just after I got to KU, the year after. He then graduated from KU in 1977 and initially went to Rice University for grad school. He didn't like Texas and Rice, and so he got smart and came to Tucson to go to the Planetary Sciences Department at the University of Arizona and got his PhD there in 1982. After there, he went to the University of Maryland and had a postdoc for 3 years from 82 to 85.
With Micah Hearn?
With Micah Hearn, who I had met on Kitt Peak many, many years before that. He then was a research scientist at Planetary Science Institute in Tucson for a few years from 85 to 89, at which point he was hired at the University of Florida, went southeast, and was there from 89 to 98, where he became a full professor very quickly. And contrary to what most people do, he then resigned his full professorship in order to become a program officer at Research Corporation and a senior research scientist at the Lunar Planetary Lab here in Tucson from 1998 to 2002. At which point he was made an offer he couldn't refuse. And by going to the University of Central Florida to form the planetary science program there, which in short order became one of the top funded NASA planetary science programs in the entire country. I think it was in the top 5, wasn't it, Humberto?
We are within the top 10, arguably in the top 5.
Oh, okay. So he was able to move things along really well by hiring a whole bunch of really good people. So at present, he holds a provost research professorship at UCF, but was able to pull things such that even though he's on the faculty at the University of Central Florida and teaching classes there, he now lives in Tucson, having sold his house in Florida and now living in Tucson. He's had a Fulbright Senior Award in 2008. University of Florida Teaching Award. He has an Asteroid 3327 named after him. So he's a kid who's done pretty well since he left KU. And just recently, he's been awarded a Jefferson, I have a piece of almond in my throat, a Jefferson Fellowship, a Jefferson Science Fellowship to work for a year in the State Department. Doing science content and educational, cultural things there. So he's had a tremendous background since leaving Lawrence, and it's a tremendous thrill to introduce Humberto Campins to give us a great talk today.
Thank you, Steve. I don't know if I can live up to whoever you describe, but that's...
As I said, the kid's done pretty well since he left.
But I feel like I've been, people sometimes are lucky, sometimes they're good. I've been much luckier than I've been good. But I'll take it. It's worked for me. And anyway, so let me share with you guys my PowerPoint. So I have planned approximately a half an hour presentation and leave it then up to questions. If there is enough interest, I've added at the end a few extra slides on one of our recent publications on, on the results from OSIRIS-REx. And so I'm giving you an update on OSIRIS-REx. I'm a proud Jayhawk. That was the Jayhawk that they were using when I attended KU. And I hear that later in the century, in the century, they used a new logo. right? That's making me feel old, making Steve feel older. By the way, Steve and I met in the ground floor of Oliver Hall, where on August the 14th of 1973. Anyway, so we had a perfect launch of OSIRIS-REx on September the 8th, 2016. The typical, the weather that evening, it was the sun was setting behind us, and the launch went perfectly, and we had delightful onshore breeze. The normal weather at that time of year would be a thunderstorm, a tropical storm, or a hurricane, which we had a month later. But OSIRIS-REx was launched about 2 milliseconds late. Then the main justifications for the mission, the main goals for the mission, are revealing our solar system history, which is bring back a sample from a carbonaceous asteroid for analysis on Earth. That's our main goal. So in that way, we will be revealing solar system history, mitigating impact hazards. It turns out that Bennu is the most potentially hazardous asteroid. So we want to make sure that if we have to deflect Bennu or another asteroid like it, we want to be able to know as much about it as possible. Enabling human exploration. It turns out that asteroids are still being considered as a target for human exploration. If we're going to get to the surface of Mars, chances are that we're going to have to stop in the moons of Mars, which are both captured asteroids, and also developing a space economy. And I probably don't have to spend a lot of time explaining to you guys how expensive it is to put things in orbit. And so the moment, less than 1% of what sits on the launch pad gets into orbit. And so the moment that you can produce fuel from asteroids cheaper than you can put it into orbit, you're going to have a large number of customers. They're going to have basically a very important market that's going to want that hydrogen and that oxygen. So there is likely to be a self-sustaining space economy in the not too distant future, and identifying some of the resources on near-Earth asteroids like those on Bennu is part of our mission. So our name stands for Origins Spectral Interpretation. So Origins, return and analyze the sample from a pristine carbonaceous asteroid. Spectral interpretation, map the chemistry and mineralogy of the asteroid. Resource identification, as I just mentioned, resources for mining. Security, measure a potentially hazardous asteroid in case we need to deflect it. And regular explorer, touch the surface and see how it reacted to our sampling process. So all of that makes up the name, OSIRIS-REx. I was actually surprised when I joined the team. I was asked to join the team in January of 2010. To realize that this was only NASA's 4th sample return mission. The first one was Apollo, then was Genesis, Stardust, and OSIRIS-REx is the 4th one. A quick reminder of the asteroid belt, the Trojan asteroids, the near-Earth asteroids in red. One of them is Bennu, and it's actually the most potentially hazardous, which means it is not threatening Earth right now, but it has the largest potential of evolving into an orbit that could threaten an impact in another 160 years or so. Here are the asteroids that are that have been visited by spacecraft, we have among them, here's OSIRIS-REx, but in addition to OSIRIS-REx, it's Hayabusa 1 and Hayabusa 2. So we have been collaborating extensively with our Japanese colleagues. As a matter of fact, I have a weekly call with a team that includes a Japanese, junior Japanese colleague. And my hat's off to them. They went to an asteroid, asteroid Itokawa, collected a sample and brought it back to Earth before NASA, ESA, and the Russians. They're remarkable space agency. And now they've done the same thing with a primitive asteroid, Ryugu, and they got their samples back already in their labs. And so Bennu, we knew a good amount about it before we selected it for our target. As a matter of fact, because it came really close to Earth and was observed in detail by the Arecibo Observatory. Here's some radar images, and then the modeled shape that came out of that. And because of the delta V with Earth being so low, we selected it as our primary target. And by the way, I am not going to be reading the chat while I am talking to you guys. So if you have a question, please interrupt. So the name Bennu came from a third grade student, Michael Puzio. The Planetary Society held an international contest, and this student suggested the name Bennu, which is a mythical bird that comes out of the heart of Osiris. So it fits very well with all the Egyptian mythology. And so here is Asteroid Bennu, not mythical bird Bennu. And so
Humberto, it wasn't named until after the project was on its way.
Yeah, it wasn't named until about 40 years ago.
Okay.
So it took us a while to go from 1999 RQ36 to Bennu. And as a matter of fact, when I published my paper on the likely origin of Bennu in the main belt, it was still called 1999 RQ36. Anyway, so here's a picture of the surface of Bennu, a number of images that were taken in December of 2018. And here's a little bit of a timeline. So we launched in 2016. We got there at the end of 2018. We've spent about 2 years mapping it. At the end of 2020, we collected our sample. And in May of 2021, we're going to be heading back to Earth. Before that, we're going to do a farewell tour and I'm going to image in detail the site where the sample was obtained. Okay, so here's again the orbits of Earth in green, of Bennu, and of OSIRIS-REx. And then, as I mentioned, in October 21st of 2020, we collected the sample, and we still had to stay there until sometime in 2021 because we were waiting for the two orbits to line up and for the return trip to be lowest energy. And so we have our sample, but we're going to go back and image that sample site and see how our 5 second or so, or actually 10 seconds interaction with the surface modified it. A little bit about robotic exploration, because I get this question a lot, and I know this group is more sophisticated than that, but people say, well, didn't NASA stop because everybody or stopped activities altogether? People equate exploration with human exploration. And so I decided to add this slide saying that in addition to NASA's human exploration, great advances are made by robotic spacecraft, from weather satellites to Cassini to the rovers on Mars. And they are higher risk posture, no danger to the astronauts, smaller and cheaper. And the no dangers to the astronauts is particularly relevant given that the Artemis program, they may still have their official target date of 2024 to put humans on the surface of the moon, back on the surface of the moon. That would take out the no and would add big danger to the astronaut. It would be crazy. All of the technical people are telling NASA that it's essentially impossible to get back to the moon with humans by 2024. But of course, there were a lot of political reasons why the previous administration wanted that. But I think the new administration is going to clarify that, and they're likely to move it by a number of years. Anyway, but robotic exploration is efficient. It also will pave the way for human exploration. Now, why sample return? we have an extensive meteorite collection. Most of those meteorites come from asteroids, and a lot of what we know about asteroids come from studying of those meteorites. However, 99.9% of what enters the atmosphere is lost before we pick up that meteorite on the ground. And so we don't know what that 99.9% is. And as a matter of fact, often during our discussions of the surface of Bennu, a lot of our meteorologists on the science team were saying, that does not look like my CM2 chondrites in my lab. And I kept reminding the team, yes, that CM2 chondrite in your lab is the 0.1% that made it through the atmosphere. We don't know what we lost in the atmosphere, and what is sitting on the surface of Bennu could be very different from what you have in your lab. And so in the lab, we can apply the state-of-the-art analytical instruments that are too heavy for spacecraft. And of course, future scientists will be inventing new instruments that we can apply to that. So most of the sample that gets brought back by OSIRIS-REx will be curated and saved for future study. A small fraction will be studied immediately. Okay, and then one of the main scientific reasons for OSIRIS-REx is to understand ancient Earth. We believe that both the moon and the Earth went through these lava oceans phase where the surface was not a solid surface, and it was basically molten rock. And any information about, well, any organics that might have existed then were burnt. Once that surface cools and solidifies, it impacts with asteroids and comets that bring Earth its organics. But any evidence of what existed on Earth before Earth got erased before life, got erased by life itself. So we have a situation that where our organic molecules that existed on Earth before life formed has been erased by life itself. So by once the surface cooled and solidified. And this living cell, hopefully. In addition, the developing the space economy, the asteroids are ideal resources for developing the space economy soon. And this soon, I think, will be not much more than a decade, in my opinion. We'll be able to mine for fuel and be delivering it to Earth for all of the commercial and scientific satellites around Earth. And then the other thing that I listened to a talk by these people, which were called Made in Space, where they have these 3D printers that are being used in the space station, and their plans are for much more. And imagine, instead of having to build something here on Earth, put it in this small tube, shake it and expose it to a lot of G's, and then deliver it into space. Instead of doing all that, you can print your satellite in space where it doesn't never have to even withstand 1G, and it could be perfectly functional in its environment without having the extra cost of making it sufficient, making it withstand all that launching process that is not necessary if you print things in space. So the space mining and manufacturing in space is going to create things that we can't even imagine, because they're just not feasible to build on Earth, put in a small tube, and then launch. Another view of Bennu, I'm embarrassed to say how many hours I spent just staring at these images. It was delightful. So most of what we predicted on Bennu was indeed what we encountered. So, size, density, albedo, etc. So most of the global properties is what we found. But we, based on radar and thermal observations, we expected a coarse sand or pebbles on the surface. And what we ended up finding were meter-sized boulders with maybe quarter meter or so looser material around it, but no pebbles, no sand. And we looked everywhere, and it was just not a very hospitable place for us to go down and pick up a sample the way we had originally planned. The other delightful surprise that we found, this was a tough challenge, but this was a delightful surprise, is that the asteroid was active, was emitting particles into from its surface in a process that we still don't know what it is. Micrometeorite impacts is one possible process. Thermal cracking of the surface because of extreme temperature excursions every day is another possible process. But when we first saw this, we got scared because, oh, those are particles that could be a threat to the spacecraft. We quickly determined that they were not, and then we studied them in detail. We published a couple of papers on that. So in terms of smooth areas, the navigation team said, we need an area about 50 meters across that is smooth sand, no rocks, for us to be able to deliver the spacecraft safely. So we took a look at this and we told the navigation team, no such area. And then they came back and they said, the spacecraft is navigating so well and we are so good that we can put it down in an area half that size, 25 meters across, smooth terrain, no rocks. Give us one of those, we'll go get the sample. Bang, no such area. And then they said, how big is your biggest smooth area? And we said, well, less than 10 meters. And it's not going to be smooth sand. It's going to be all kinds of rocks around it. That's going to make the approach very difficult. So we had narrowed it down to about 4 areas. And out of those 4 areas, we did much more detailed imaging. And we narrowed it down to Nightingale, which was not my favorite. My favorite was Osprey. But I now realize that Nightingale was a much better choice. I'll tell you more in a second. We came down at a very low, both vertical and horizontal velocity with respect to the surface of the asteroid. We deployed our mechanical arm with a sampling mechanism at the end. We sampled and then we moved away. And here here are the images from, you probably have seen these, but you may notice that the head of the sample mechanism moves just before it touches the surface so that it is completely perpendicular, parallel to the surface. So we did this and we found out that there was all kinds of dust just below the surface, which was good. As a matter of fact, we don't know exactly how much sample we collected because there was a maneuver we were going to perform to measure that, and we chose not to. I'll tell you in a second. But the conditions under which we sampled had been simulated in the zero-G flights of this mechanism, and under the conditions in which we sampled on the zero-G flight, that's how they collected the most sample. So I'm not allowed to give numbers, in part because we haven't measured, but they're estimates, and our minimum requirement was 60 grams. We think we have collected at least 10 times more, maybe 20 times more than that. So we are delighted. We put the sample into the capsule right away. The spacecraft was supposed to perform a maneuver that would allow us to determine the amount of mass in that sample head. And we chose not to because there was so much sample that it was actually overflowing. And any maneuver we performed, we would lose sample. So we put the sample in the capsule, sealed the capsule, so now it's stowed, and we can head back to Earth anytime we want, but, well, as soon as the 2 orbits line up, but our sample is now safe in the capsule.
What's the physical size of that container?
This is about a half a meter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Big.
And that capsule is going to be launched towards the Utah desert in 2023. It has a parachute or set of parachutes, but it is also designed to survive entry even if the parachutes don't deploy. We hope they do. But yeah. And the other thing is that being on the imaging team, I've been talking to Bashar Risk, who's the principal investigator on the camera, and he suggested that we take a series of images of the capsule going into the atmosphere. So we will be imaging a meteor that is being produced by our capsule from above. So that's going to be really cool. So we're going to do a little movie of that meteor. Okay, so again, the timeline, we're hoping to get, well, we're planning on getting back to Earth in 2023, and that's when the sample analysis starts. So there's a little bit of a break right now for those of us who are who are on the team. And I'm gonna take advantage of the fact that I got offered this fellowship to go do science and diplomacy until the sample comes back. And so reminder that the Japanese Space Agency Hayabusa 2 came back in December of 2020, so they already have their sample. There's an agreement between NASA and ESA to share samples, so they're gonna give us 10% of theirs, we're gonna give them 10% of ours. If ours is as large as we suspect it is, they're gonna get a lot more sample from our 10% that they're gonna get from their entire sample. So, but we don't mind because we get another sample from another asteroid that is going to increase tremendously our scientific return. In conclusion, OSIRIS-REx is at Bennu until actually mid-2021. This potentially hazardous asteroid and target for asteroid mining. Objects like Bennu may have brought the prebiotic molecules and volatiles such as water to Earth, and the sample delivery will be in 2023. I will stop for questions, but I have a few more slides later if you guys wanted to talk about one of our interesting scientific results from studying the surface of Bennu.
Yes.
I did not plant that. Okay, so I'll go through it real quick so we still have plenty of time for questions. It turns out that yours truly was puzzled by the fact that an asteroid called Alma-Hattasita, which is really strange asteroid, not asteroid, I'm sorry, a meteorite. Alma-Hattasita fell on Earth in 2008. It was the first time that we detected an asteroid above the atmosphere. The Catalina Sky Survey detected it, predicted that it was going to enter the atmosphere, came through the atmosphere, was tracked by a number of techniques, fell in the Sudan desert. Peter Yenniskins from NASA Ames, with an American passport,